I work at a hospital. After a long shift, I finally went out to grab something quick to eat. I stopped at the nearest McDonald's, a brightly lit and familiar place, meant to be a brief escape from the fatigue weighing on my shoulders. At this time of night, the restaurant was almost empty except for an employee behind the counter and an elderly couple sitting in a corner finishing their meals. The atmosphere was quiet, with warm, soft lighting, almost cozy, and the smell of fries filled the air. I ordered my meal and chose a table near the window where I could see the streetlights flickering. The employee who served me seemed nervous, constantly glancing at the back door. I found it strange but didn't give it much thought. I opened the wrapping of my sandwich and started eating, feeling relaxation wash over me as I chewed. The restaurant lights started to flicker, interrupting my thoughts. I looked around, wondering if it was a temporary glitch, but saw the employee flinch with each flicker. Sounds of footsteps and banging came from the kitchen, noises that shouldn't be there at this hour. Anxiety began to creep in, a nagging feeling I tried to push away with each bite. My instincts screamed that something was wrong. The employee, now visibly pale, came out from behind the counter and approached me. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, my heart starting to race. "Please," he whispered, "help me lock the back door. Something or someone is trying to get in." My mind raced as I followed the employee to the kitchen. With each step, the sound of banging and scratching grew louder, echoing off the stainless steel and ceramic walls. When we reached the back door, we saw the doorknob turning frantically as if someone was trying to force it open. I looked at the employee. His eyes were filled with panic like mine. Together, we pushed a freezer against the door, trying to keep it closed. My arms trembled with fear and effort as he called the police with shaking hands. The employee, whose name tag read Mike, was on the phone with the police, his voice low and urgent. "Please come quickly. Someone is trying to get in through the back door. We're in danger," he said, his tone laden with panic. He hung up the phone and looked at me, sweat streaming down his forehead. "They're on their way," he said quietly, but he didn't seem very relieved. The front door of the restaurant was thrown open forcefully, and police officers entered with their weapons drawn. They shouted for us to step back, quickly checking the area. When they reached the kitchen, they found us still holding the barricade. "Are you okay?" one of the officers asked. Mike said yes, but I could only let out a sigh of relief. Their presence finally broke the tension, and I felt my knees weaken. The officers quickly removed the barricade and opened the back door, revealing a dark, empty alley. Whoever had been there was gone. As the police investigated the dark alley, Mike and I stood outside the restaurant, still trying to process what had happened. The sirens, now off, made the night air quieter than it should have been. The elderly couple who had been inside the restaurant had been escorted out and looked at us with expressions of shock and concern. One of the officers approached, his face serious but trying to appear reassuring. "We didn't find anyone in the alley," he said, "but we'll continue to patrol the area. You both did a good job staying calm and protecting yourselves. We'll make sure you get home safely." Mike let out a deep sigh and looked at me, a mix of relief and exhaustion in his eyes. He said, "Thank you." As the officers finished searching the place and taking notes, one of them came over to us with a notepad. "We need your statements," he said, "and also we recommend avoiding being alone at night for a while. Someone is clearly trying to cause trouble around here." I had recently moved into a new apartment and felt an immediate sense of relief. It was only a 5-minute walk from campus, and I could finally enjoy the extra time to study and relax. It was a modest studio, but enough for me. At first, the nights were quiet and peaceful, which helped me concentrate on my readings and projects. Like most college students, my time was scarce, and during exam weeks, I heavily relied on McDonald's. It was quick, cheap, and the delivery person was always on time. However, one day something strange happened. I was in the middle of a study session when I heard the doorbell ring. It was 11:30 at night. I found the timing odd but went to answer. To my surprise, the delivery person was there holding a McDonald's bag. "Order for number 12? He asked, looking a bit confused. I hadn't ordered anything that night. Nevertheless, I paid and took the bag. Upon opening it, I saw that it contained only a hamburger. I thought it might be a mistake. Perhaps someone had put my address by accident. I laughed at the situation, threw the hamburger in the fridge, and went back to studying. In the following days, the routine of exams and assignments took over my life. However, the deliveries continued. Always at midnight, always just one hamburger. At first, I thought it was some kind of bad joke. I decided to let it slide, ignoring the unsolicited deliveries. As the nights went by, the situation became increasingly disturbing. The deliveries continued punctually at midnight, and I couldn't understand who was behind this. I asked my friends if they knew of any prank, but everyone denied any involvement. One night, around 11:55, I decided to stay on watch. I sat in the darkened living room, peeking out the window. Anxiety made my heart race, but I needed to find out what was happening. At exactly midnight, I saw a delivery person approaching. I opened the door before he even rang the bell. "This must be a mistake. I didn't order anything," I said, trying to sound casual. He looked at me, confused. "I just deliver, man. It's on the receipt." He handed me the bag, and as I took it, he was already walking away. I closed the door and went straight to the kitchen. I placed the bag on the counter and, upon opening it, felt a chill run down my spine. Besides the usual hamburger, there was a small note inside. I picked up the piece of paper with trembling hands and read the scribbled words. "We're watching you." My stomach turned. An irrational fear took hold of me. Who was doing this, and why? I looked around the apartment, feeling as if invisible eyes were watching me at that very moment. I tried to continue studying, but it was impossible to concentrate. The paranoia was growing. The following days were a torment. I avoided coming home late, and when I was in the apartment, I constantly checked the windows and doors, making sure they were locked. The deliveries, however, stopped for a while, and I began to think it might have been just a stupid prank. But then, one night, the doorbell rang again. My heart raced. I walked slowly to the door, with a knot in my stomach, and opened it. There was another McDonald's bag, left on the floor. I picked it up reluctantly and took it inside. Upon opening it, I found another note. This time, the words were even more threatening. "Don't think we're far away. We're always here." Desperate, I called the police. They came, asked questions, and took the notes as evidence, but they couldn't do much beyond filing a report. The feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. I was exhausted, unable to sleep properly, always on high alert. The last delivery happened on a rainy night. I was at the campus library, trying to distract myself with studies, but the tension was unbearable. I decided to return to the apartment earlier, hoping the storm would drown out any strange sounds and give me some peace. I arrived home around 10 o'clock, soaked and shivering from the cold. I locked the door behind me and wrapped myself in a towel. The rain was heavy outside, the sound of the drops against the window almost comforting. Perhaps it was the presence of the storm, but something about that night felt different, more dense and oppressive. At midnight, I heard the doorbell ring. The sound echoed through the room, making my heart leap. I got up slowly, hesitantly, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I opened the door, there was no one there. just the McDonald's bag, soaked by the rain. I picked up the bag and quickly closed the door. This time, there wasn't just a hamburger and a note, but something heavier at the bottom. I took out the hamburger, and the note fell to the floor along with a small recording device. I picked up the note first, almost unwilling to read it, but morbid curiosity won out. "This is the last time. Do not underestimate us." With my heart racing, I turned on the recording device. The voice that came out was cold and metallic. "We are watching you always. There's no point in running or hiding. We know where you are, what you do, every move you make." My mind spun, trying to understand what it meant. Who were these people? Why were they doing this to me? I felt a wave of panic and despair consume me. I turned off the device and stood there, listening to the rain outside, desperately trying to calm my breathing. I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. The next morning, I made the decision to move out, abandoning that apartment and looking for a place where I could feel safe again. I reported the incident to the police, but nothing more happened. From that moment, the deliveries and threats ceased. The fear lingered for a while, but the feeling of being watched slowly faded away. I never found out who was behind those messages or why they had chosen me as their target. Life went on, but the experience left a deep mark. To this day, when I pass by a McDonald's, I get a chill and remember the nights of terror I spent in that apartment. I had just started my shift at McDonald's that night. The fluorescent lights illuminated the space, while the familiar smell of fries and fresh hamburgers filled the air. It was a relatively calm night with not many customers. I was at the counter, serving the few people who came in with simple orders. Then a new group entered. Among them was a peculiar man. He seemed a bit out of place, wearing a tattered coat and a hat that partially hid his face. What really caught my attention was how he was observing everything around him. His eyes scanned every detail of the place, as if he were looking for something or someone. When he finally approached the counter, I felt a chill run down my spine. He ordered a coffee, but he did it in an almost mechanical way without taking his eyes off me. I tried not to give it much importance. After all, strange people showed up all the time. I handed him his order, and he went to sit at a table in the corner, from where he could watch me more easily. For the next few hours, he stayed there, sitting, sipping his coffee slowly and staring at me. Every time I looked in his direction, our eyes met. There was something deeply unsettling about the way he looked at me, a mix of curiosity and something more sinister. I tried to focus on my work, but it was hard to ignore his disturbing presence. I asked a colleague if he had noticed the man's strange behavior, but no one seemed to care much. Maybe he's just an eccentric customer, I thought, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Days passed, and I began to forget the incident with the peculiar man. The usual hustle and bustle at McDonald's continued, and I found myself immersed in the busy work routine. Then he came back. This time, he looked even stranger. He came in and went straight to the counter. He ordered another coffee, but this time, while I was preparing his order, he said something that made my blood run cold. "You work here every day, don't you?" he asked with a strange smile. I responded automatically, trying not to show the growing discomfort I felt. He took his coffee and headed to the same corner table, where he once again watched me for the rest of the shift. From that day on, he started showing up more frequently. Always at the same time, always ordering the same thing, and always watching me. It didn't take long before he started leaving small messages on the trays. Phrases like, "I know where you live," or "See you soon." I showed some of these messages to my colleagues, but most thought it was just a bad joke from some random customer. But I knew it was more than that. There was something deeply wrong with that man. One night, When I went to the bathroom, I found another message. It was written on the mirror with red lipstick. "You can't run away." My heart raced and I felt adrenaline take over. Who was that man? And why was he stalking me? I tried to stay calm, but each passing day, his presence became more threatening. He didn't talk much, but his messages said everything. I started feeling constantly watched, even when he wasn't there. My anxiety grew with each shift, and I was always looking over my shoulder. One day, after another long, intense night at work, I went out to the parking lot. I was tired and just wanted to go home. That's when I saw a piece of paper stuck to my car's windshield. I picked it up with trembling hands and read the message written in large, scrawled letters. "This isn't over. See you soon." At that moment, I realized my life would never be the same. What was this man planning? And how could I protect myself from someone who seemed to know my every move? I needed to do something, but I felt alone, terrified, and unsure of where to turn. The next day, I went to the police. I told them everything that was happening. The man's constant visits, the frightening messages, and the last threat I found on my car. The officer who attended to me listened with a serious expression, but he didn't seem convinced there was much to be done. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, "but without concrete evidence of a crime, it's hard to act." I left the police station feeling powerless and even more scared. I knew I had to take my own precautions. I bought a cheap security camera and installed it in my car, hoping to capture some evidence. The following days were tense, but the peculiar man didn't show up. I started to think he might have given up. Maybe just going to the police was enough to scare him off. But then he came back the next night. I was at the counter as usual when he walked in. The same tattered coat, the same disturbing gaze. This time he didn't order anything. He just stood there, in the middle of the restaurant, staring at me. The restaurant was relatively busy, but it felt like only the two of us existed at that moment. He slowly walked up to the counter, his hands in his coat pockets. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice low but carrying an implicit threat. "I told you it wasn't over." I was paralyzed, unsure of what to do or say. He turned and left the restaurant, disappearing into the night. I knew that wasn't the end, but the beginning of something even more terrible. When my shift finally ended, I walked to my car with a growing sense of dread. I opened the door with trembling hands and sat down, taking deep breaths to try to calm myself. I looked at the passenger seat and saw an envelope. With hesitant fingers, I opened the envelope and took out a photo. It was a picture of me taken from inside the restaurant through the window. On the back was a message written in capital letters, "I'm always watching you." The feeling of constantly being watched engulfed me. The man wasn't just joking. He was serious, dangerous, and obsessed. My attempts to seek help seemed insignificant against the real threat he posed. I started thinking about how I could protect myself. I locked all the doors and windows of my house that night, sleeping with one eye open, expecting the worst. I decided I couldn't keep living like this. I talked to my manager at McDonald's and explained the situation. He was understanding and agreed to transfer me to the morning shift, hoping this would deter the peculiar man. The first few days of the new shift were relatively calm. The flow of customers was different, the work pace lighter, and I began to think I might finally be escaping that threat. Then he appeared again. I was in the middle of the morning rush when I saw him walk through the door. The same tattered coat, the same fixed gaze. My stomach turned, and I had to hold onto the counter to keep from showing the panic that was taking over me. He approached slowly, but this time he didn't say anything. He just handed me a tray with a note under the coffee cup. I waited until he walked away to grab the note, my hands trembling so much that I almost dropped it. The message was short but terrifying. "Changing shifts won't save you. I was in a panic. I began looking around, trying to find any sign that someone else noticed the man's strange behavior. But once again, no one seemed to pay attention. When my shift ended, I waited inside the restaurant until it was completely empty before leaving. The walk to my car felt endless. When I got to the car, I found another message, this time attached to the rearview mirror. Next time could be the last. Panic consumed me. I quickly got into the car and drove straight home, my hands sweating so much that I nearly lost control of the wheel several times. That night was the worst of all. I was exhausted but couldn't sleep. Then I heard a strange sound coming from outside. I got out of bed, my heart pounding, and went to the window. Outside, in the middle of the street, he was standing there, the peculiar man watching my house. I grabbed my phone and called the police again, trying to explain the urgency of the situation. By the time they arrived, he had already disappeared, leaving only the shadow of his fear behind. The officers advised me to lock up the house well and try not to worry, but it was impossible. I knew he was watching me, waiting for the right moment. The next morning, when I left my friend's house to get something from the car, I found another message, this time carved into the hood. "You can't escape." It was then that I realized he was closer than I thought, that nothing I did would be enough to keep him away. The terror culminated that night. I came home feeling like I was being followed. I quickly got inside and locked all the doors, but the feeling of safety didn't come. I went to the living room window and looked outside. There he was, standing on the sidewalk, watching me. I grabbed my phone and called the police again, begging for help. But before they arrived, I heard the sound of breaking glass. I looked back and saw that he was inside my house, just a few meters away. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the glint of a blade in his hand and a smile of pure malice on his face. I woke up in the hospital with the serious face of a police officer watching me. He told me they had caught him, that he was finally in custody. But even so, I knew the scars of that terror would stay with me forever.